So this is original investigative reporting. And I know every time someone talks about Yemen, if they talk about Yemen, they mostly talk about the bombs or they talk about the famine. This article talks about the siege. It breaks down bit by bit how the siege works. So, please just give me 20 minutes of your time so I can explain this to you. And this is original reporting. And I did it with a Yemeni economist. He's an Oxford graduate. He worked at the World Bank. He's been an economist for decades. And, all of this data is from the UN, the World Bank, the IMF. We use these sources on purpose so no one can accuse this report of being biased. Is no opinion here, it's just facts. And it shows you how terrible the siege on Yemen is. And no one talks about this. So again, please, give me 20 minutes of your time just to explain this. And please share the video, share the article far and wide, because we need to raise awareness about this. The suffering of Yemenis that is caused by this siege is unimaginable. People complain about paying $4 per gallon. Yemenis are paying $9 per gallon. And this is one of the poorest countries on earth. That's just one thing that I'm going to tell you right now. So this is the article that I put out. It's called Silent Killer, The Siege of Yemen. And if you want to read this, it's on richardmedhurst.substack.com. That's where I publish my articles. Now, let me walk you through this. So March 30th, just yesterday, you had an announcement from the Saudis saying that there's a ceasefire in Yemen. They're ceasing all military activities, and you had tons of people celebrating in Yemen and outside Yemen. They thought it's the end of the war, right? Because the Saudis, this Saudi coalition, which includes the UAE and a few other countries, and is backed by the United States and the UK, they've been bombing Yemen for 7 years, right? Actually, last week was the 7-year anniversary. So people are tired of the war. The thing is, this ceasefire, guess what it doesn't include? It doesn't include lifting the siege. And the siege is just as bad as the bombs, if not worse. And you never hear anyone talk about this, and I'm going to explain to you how it works. So basically, you have a port in Yemen, which is called Hodeidah. I'm going to show it to you on the map. Here is the port of Hodeidah. It's the biggest port in Yemen, and it's right here. So, this is the lifeline of Yemen. If you want to bring fuel into Yemen, you can't just go to Yemen. You have to first go to the United Nations. They set up a body, right? This is the UN verification body in Djibouti. So you have to go to Djibouti with your ship. The United Nations, they inspect your cargo. They check where your funding is from. They check that you're ready to go, okay? And again, this is from the... I'm pulling up a certificate for you. But the body that does this is the United Nations verification and inspection mechanism for Yemen, UNVIM. And so when you get clearance, they give you this document. So this is an official document that I've obtained from from a ship that's been cleared by the UN to go to Yemen. And you get this certificate of clearance. Now, you might be thinking, well, great, you get the certificate, you can just go to Yemen. No. Fuel ships that try to go to Hodeidah, which again is the biggest port in Yemen, get stopped. By who? By the Saudis. So the Saudi coalition are randomly coming in and detaining fuel ships, and then they take them to a place up in the Red Sea called the Coalition Holding Area. Okay, so here's the Coalition Holding Area on the map. Do you see this red dot over here? CHA? That's where it is. And it's near the Saudi town of Jizan, right? So you want to bring your ship here. They hijack your ship and bring you over here. In the shipping business, in the shipping industry, if you're transporting cargo and you don't offload the cargo, you have to pay a fine to the owner of the ship, because basically you're preventing the owner from making money from using that ship. And this fine is called a demurrage cost. Okay? Now, every single day that Saudi Arabia and its coalition detain a fuel ship, every single day, those demurrage costs, those fines add up. And just to give you an idea how long this detention is, on average, this is last year in 2021, on average, fuel ships that were meant for the public in Yemen were held for 158 days. I mean, that's basically half a year. So can you imagine, every single day for half a year, you got fines piling up and piling up. Do you know how much this adds up to? On average, it's $5.2 million US dollars. Those costs, who's going to pay those costs? Yemenis at the pump. They have to pay for these costs. It's all pushed down onto the consumer, right? So this is just the average. This is just the average, 3.2 million. For what? No reason. There's no reason for this. As I told you, the ships already have permission from the United Nations to go to Yemen. The entire point of UN VIM was to clear ships to go to Yemen. And the Saudis just don't care. They come in and hijack the ships and block them for no reason. Absolutely no reason. Just to give you an idea, in 2020, right? So UN cleared ships that were going to Hodeidah were detained by the Saudi coalition for a total of 4,683 days. In total, these ships paid $85 million in demurrage fines. Again, so all of the ships that were detained in 2020 that were going to Yemen to give fuel for the public, $85 million in fines. And again, who pays that cost? The cost is pushed down onto the Yemenis. So this is the poorest country on earth. This is a country that's been bombed for 7 years. It's a country that the UN has declared the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. 17 million people. Again, look at this. This is all in the beginning of the article. 17 million people are estimated to be food insecure. That's more than half the population. That's most Yemenis, basically, right? So this is one of the most. I mean, this Yemenis are suffering more than anyone, and on top of it, they have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for fuel for absolutely no reason. No reason whatsoever. Do you ever hear this on the BBC? I haven't even gotten started, man. Have you ever heard anybody explain this? The fact that you have this siege on Hodeidah, less and less ships are coming, right? Because who wants to go get detained for a year? Some ships have actually been held for over a year. Look at the number of ships, how it's declining every year. Look, in 2019, you had 80 ships that went to Hodeidah. 2020, it was 63. 2021, 5 ships. And this year, 1 ship. 1 ship for public fuel consumption. Again, let me be very clear. You got 2 types of ships that are coming to Hodeidah. One type is for the private sector, for companies to run their factories, or for the UN, okay? The UN ships, there's no delay on that. That's just for the UN. The other type is public consumption. That means you're a Yemeni. You want to go fill your gas tank up. You want cooking gas. You want fuel for your generator. Fuel that goes to farmers, to hospitals. This is public consumption, and this is the most important one. And do you know what the Saudis are doing? They are punishing the ships that are bringing fuel for the public are punished the most. So again, this is all the data that me and Amir put together. Amir Al-Tibah, again, he's Oxford graduate, worked at the World Bank for 10 years. He's an expert economist. We put together this data, and it's all from the United Nations and from the Yemen Petroleum Company. All of this data is public, it's unbiased, it's not from us. Just to show you something, in 2021, look how many days these public ships were held. So you got 3 and 2, so 5 vessels like we were just looking at, right? You only had 5 vessels in 2021. Do you see how they were held for 351 and 438 days? And look how much they paid. They paid 3.2 million on average. Meanwhile, the private sector, so the ships that are not for public consumption, the ships that are just going to the private companies for the factories, they get held for a much tinier period and therefore pay much tinier fines. So, I mean, not only are they holding the ships, but they're making sure the ones that are meant for Yemenis are held longer, and so Yemenis get screwed even more. Just to give you an example, I got a certificate for a UN certificate from one of these ships. This is called the Splendor Sapphire. That's the name of the ship. Do you see when this ship was cleared? 3rd of January, 2022. Do you know where that ship is? Is it in Yemen? No, it's not in Yemen. It's still in detention. You can literally go up on maritimetraffic.com. You look up the name Splendor Sapphire, and you can see exactly where the ship is. And it's right off the coast of Jizan in the coalition holding area, instead of being down here in Hodeidah. That's 4 months, right? That's almost 4 months now. We're April. That ship has been held for, who knows why. It's been cleared by the UN, but the Saudis won't let it go. Now, Here's another. I published a list of other ships that are still being detained, that are still in detention. This list is from today, so it's the latest, and this is from the Yemen Petroleum Company. Now, here comes the other problem, because you might be thinking, well, if you want to bring fuel into Yemen, you don't have to go to Hodeidah. Why don't you just go to another port, which is what the Saudis say. They say there's no blockade on Yemen. Anyone can bring anything to Yemen. They can bring food and fuel. No. Hodeidah is, first of all, Yemen's biggest port, okay? Also, it's the closest to the capital of Sana'a. And again, most Yemenis live near Hodeidah and in the areas that are controlled by the Sana'a government. Again, just for those of you who are not clear on this, in Yemen, you have a government in Aden that was overthrown in 2014, and this government is the internationally recognized government at the UN, and this is the government that is backed by Saudi Arabia, okay? The thing is, though, most Yemenis don't live under the control of this Aden government. Again, it was overthrown in 2014. Most Yemenis live under areas that are controlled by the Houthis or Ansar Allah. Again, I just call it the Sana'a government, because Sana'a is the city here, it's the capital, and that's what we mean. We're talking about the Houthis. So most Yemenis live here. They don't live down here in Aden or Mukalla. They live over here near Hodeidah. So logically, if you want to bring fuel to Yemen, you're going to go where the people are, right? If you want to bring fuel to the United States, you're going to go to New York. You're going to go to New York Harbor. You're not going to go dock in Alaska. You get what I'm saying? So just to kind of give you a rough idea. Now, the thing is, the ships that don't want to get detained at Hodeidah by the Saudi coalition, they have the choice of going to other ports. It's not really a choice. They're forced to do that because of the blockade. They wouldn't go to other ports otherwise. So what are these other ports? The other ports are Mukalla. So again, right here on the same map, here's Mukalla down here, which is it's on the other side of the country, literally. Do you see all the people live here? And they got to go to Mukalla to bring the fuel. And then there's also Aden down here, okay? So these are two ports that you can go to. Now, here come the other problems. Number one, as I just showed you, this is very far away. So if your goal is to bring fuel to Hodeidah or to Sana'a, where most people live, your fuel trucks need to drive all the way now from Mukalla over here, or all the way from Aden over here. So first of all, you have higher transportation costs with the fuel trucks. Not only that, when you import fuel through these ports, through Aden or through Mukalla, which again are not controlled by the Houthis, they're controlled by the Saudi-backed government, you have to pay higher fees. A lot higher. I have all of this data in the article, the exact breakdown of the fees. So you have the import price, premium, demurrage costs, additional double taxes, commission, storage fees. All of this adds up, okay, to $735 per metric ton. $735 for every metric ton of gasoline, okay? Now, basically what happens is Yemenis are now being taxed twice, right? Because you got the Saudi-backed government in Aden, which is taxing them first. And then when the fuel trucks bring the fuel into the Sana'a government areas, they're taxed again by that government. And the difference here is that the Saudi-backed government in Aden, they claim that they're the legitimate government because the UN recognizes them as the government. And they have control of Yemen's resources, and they moved the central bank, the Yemeni central bank, to Aden. So they say that we're the legitimate government, and they are taxing people. They're taxing the fuel imports on that basis. And guess what? They don't pay any salaries to government employees or to public servants who live in the Sana'a areas. So how are you going to say, I'm the legitimate government, but I don't want to pay government employees? So after taxing them on top of it, usually when you tax people, when you tax imports, you're supposed to send that to public infrastructure, pay government employees. They're not doing that. They're lining their pockets while claiming we're the legitimate government. Do you see what's going on? So Yemenis are being taxed 2 times to import the exact same oil because they can't go to Hodeidah, so they have to go to Aden or Mukalla. Look at the detour that you have to drive. This is unbelievable. So instead of going this tiny route here from Hodeidah to Sana'a, which is in green, which is like, hold on, I wrote the exact distance down here, right? So 226 kilometers. Instead of going 226 kilometers from Hodeidah to Sana'a with the fuel trucks, they have to drive this entire detour in yellow, which is up to 1,300 kilometers. I mean, this is absurd. Absolutely absurd. No one in their right mind who is trying to bring fuel to Sana'a or Hodeidah would ever go to the ports on the other side of the country and then on top of it drive this enormous detour. It gets worse. Do you know what happens when the fuel trucks are on this road, on this route? There are roadblocks. Not government roadblocks only, militias, including Al-Qaeda, who set up these checkpoints and they tell the truck drivers, pay us or we kill you. So it's basically highway robbery. So you got, like 50 checkpoints. So one checkpoint is adding 5% to the pump price, to the fuel price when you go to the gas station in Sana'a. This militia over here is adding another 10% to the pump price, another 5% here. Do you see how the costs for Yemenis are adding up from the higher taxes in Aden, from the higher transportation costs because the route is longer, from the terrorists, from the armed groups, the militias shaking down the truck drivers. All of this stuff has to be paid by Yemenis at the pump just because the Saudi Navy won't allow the ships to go to Hodeidah. This is so malicious and completely unnecessary and avoidable. And you never, ever, ever, ever hear a word about this on the news. Even when they talk about Yemen, if they talk about Yemen, they only talk about the bombs. How many of you have heard about this? Again, this is for every metric ton of gasoline that is brought through Aden, down here, right? For every metric ton of gasoline, you have $503 in those additional taxes, those import fees, and then $232 at these additional, these like roadblocks, basically where armed groups are shaking people down. Even if Yemenis could somehow, by some miracle, afford the higher fuel prices, it's not enough. You know why? Because there's not even enough fuel coming in the first place. This is the deficit, okay? So basically, in 2020, Yemenis that are living in areas under control of the Sana'a government, again, which is in these areas, this is where 80% of Yemenis live. They live here. In 2020, Yemenis that are living in these areas only consumed half of the gasoline and diesel that they actually needed from Hodeidah. So there was a 50% deficit in consumption in 2020. The next year, in 2021, 90% deficit. Okay? So because of the blockade, the Yemenis are not getting the diesel and the gasoline that they need through Hodeidah port. Now, you might be thinking, oh yeah, well, that means people can't drive their cars. No. This has nothing to do with that. Even if you are in Yemen and you don't drive a car and you don't have a generator, you are going to get impacted by this. Because when there's no fuel coming into the country, the whole economy is destroyed. First of all, hospitals cannot function. So the healthcare sector is decimated by this. And I literally have a statement right here in this in the report from the Federation of Yemeni Private Hospitals. And they say that look what they say here. They say here that blocking fuel from entering Yemen has caused the death of many patients in intensive care units, emergency and operations departments, as well as the hospital's inability to save and store medicines for chronic diseases such as diabetes and tumors. Okay, so that's already hurting the healthcare sector. I mean, again, I'm so frustrated because I can't encapsulate how bad Yemen was already doing before they intensified the siege. It's like adding insult to injury, truly. And so the other problem is that food becomes more expensive. The primary sector, agriculture, this is also decimated. The industrial sector is decimated. The services sector is decimated. Yemen's economy, the inflation rate in 2021 was 40%. 40. In France, the inflation rate in 2021 was 1.9%. 1.9 versus 40. That is how the fuel crisis, this blockade, And the terrible conditions in Yemen are hurting the economy. So just to give you an idea of how much Yemenis are paying, in 2021, the Yemenis living in the Sana'a areas paid $644 million extra for diesel and gasoline for absolutely no reason. No reason. Just so the Saudi Navy can block ships that have already been cleared by the United Nations. What is the point of the United Nations verifying and inspecting these ships if the Saudi Navy or the Saudi-led coalition are just going to come and block them anyway? And of course, who do you think is supporting the Saudi coalition? The United States, Great Britain. They have sold the Saudis hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons just for this war, specifically for this war, and giving them training and giving them logistical support. So the Saudis could never do this by themselves. The coalition could never do this without US and UK support. And it's not just the bombs, it's the siege. When you have economic warfare that is being imposed on a country, you have the creation of a black market. It's the same everywhere. Every time there's economic sanctions or there's a blockade, you end up with a black market. So people who want to buy fuel in the Sana'a areas, which again, this is where 80% of Yemenis live. If you want to buy fuel, you can't get it because there are no fuel ships coming in. Remember what I showed you? One fuel ship came in this year for public consumption. So you have to go to the black market. Let me show you how the prices are doing. I'm speechless. Honestly, I'm speechless. This is the black market price for diesel. Okay, look how from December 2020 to March 2022. So that's right now. The price on the black market went up 300%. 300% in just a little over a year. So, I mean, this situation is hopeless. It's absolutely hopeless. And it's the same thing for gasoline. Look at the price of gasoline on the black market. It just shoots up. This is unsustainable. Now, the official price, which is in blue, is useless because you can't get any oil through official channels, meaning from the YPC, which is the Yemen Petroleum Company. Again, the Yemen Petroleum Company is the body that imports fuel and then distributes it in Yemen, right? So it's the organization that does that. And you can't get any fuel because there are no ships coming in. So you have to go to the black market where you pay through the nose, if you can even pay through the nose. And I want to tell you something. In Yemen, there is no public electricity, right? The public grid does not work. There are 0 hours of electricity. That means you have to go, you have to get it from a private grid or you have to get a generator. And again, those two things the prices are astronomical because they're linked to the fuel crisis. Every single thing is linked to fuel. So it's not just about, I can't drive my car or, I can't power a generator. The whole country is going to the gutter. The economy is going to the gutter. Look at the GDP. So again, Yemen's been under bombardment since 2015, right? So its GDP keeps going down. It went from 957 in 2015 to 552 in 2017. And now it's at 359. So it's one of the poorest countries in the world. And they are paying $644 million extra for no reason. I mean, this is incredible. This is incredible, really. And this affects everything from basic needs, electricity, cooking gas, hospitals, farming, industry, all of it. All of it. It's horrific, truly. And again, just scrolling back up here, because again, I got all these graphs done. So again, Amir Al-Tibah, he's the Yemeni economist. He's based in Sana'a. He graduated at Oxford. He worked at the World Bank for 10 years. He put together the report and he approached me so we could put this out together. I think this is really important. I really ask you guys to please share this far and wide, not for my sake because it's my report, but because no one talks about this. No one has broken this down step by step and made it so clear of what the siege in Yemen means. People say they hear siege, blockade, they don't know what that means. I'm telling you exactly what it means. I'm telling you literally figure by figure what it means. Look at that. Look how no ships coming in. Again, don't get it confused. There are UN ships and private sector ships coming in, but we don't care about those. Those are useless. If you're in Yemen and you want fuel for your generator, you can't go get that from the private sector or the UN. you buy it from the public fuel consumption, right? If you're a farmer or a hospital, it's public fuel consumption. So these are the ships that we care about. One ship so far this year. And again, here's the list. I published the list of ships that are still in detention. Right? It's in the article right here from the YPC. These are all in detention for no reason. And they've been cleared in January, this one in March, this one in March, this one in March. The average time, 156 days. It was for 158 days. It was for 2021. And every single day, these are fines that the Yemenis have to pay. So again, I'm going to break this down because I got all these graphics done, especially for this article. Number one, if you try to bring fuel through Hodeida, which is Yemen's largest port, you have to get verification from the United Nations. You get the verification, but when you try going to Hodeida, the ship is detained by the Saudi Navy. And then they bring you to the coalition holding area and they keep you there for months. Some ships have been held for over a year for no reason. No reason. And every single day that you're being held, you have to pay demurrage fines. Again, these are like, it's a fine that you pay to the owner of the ship because you're not unloading the cargo. And this adds up and adds up and adds up and adds up. And on average, ships are paying $3.2 million on average. And this is, of course, a cost that is passed down onto Yemenis. And so once those ships actually get to Yemen, not only is the fuel more expensive, if they get to Yemen, but on top of it, the shortages cause everything in the country to collapse. Hospitals, farming, agriculture, you name it. Now, the other way for the ships who try to go through ports that are not under embargo, that are under the control of the Saudi-backed government, they're also screwed because they have to, first of all, pay these higher fines. Again, I made a graphic for you here. So they have to pay these higher taxes and fines. And they're basically being taxed twice for the same fuel. And then they have to travel greater distances. I mean, the detour is absolutely ridiculous, right? I can't stop showing you this map because it's so absurd. Look at this route in yellow. How on earth does that make sense? Do you know what this is like? This is like, imagine you're trying to bring fuel to New York, and instead of docking in the New York harbor, you go and dock in Florida and then drive the fuel up the entire East Coast. Why on earth would you do that if you could help it? No one would do that. This is a result of the blockade. This is a direct consequence of the blockade. Higher transportation costs because the routes are longer. And then along the way, you have roadblocks by Al-Qaeda, by other militias who are just trying to make a quick buck. And they threaten you. You either pay us, highway robbery, or we kill you. And then, of course, all of these things, higher import taxes or the double taxes, the higher transportation costs, the shakedown, the robbery by Al-Qaeda and other groups on the highway, all of this, who pays this? Yemenis. So again, just to put this in perspective, right now in Yemen, you pay $9.50 a gallon. That's not a European country. It's not a first world country. It's not a developed country. It's not even an undeveloped country. It's the country that is experiencing the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Can someone please tell me how this is fair? This is absolutely evil. It makes no sense. The only people profiting from this are the governments, the Saudi-backed government that controls these ports, the militias that are along the roads, right? The Al-Qaeda and other groups like it. And that goes to, of course, that sponsors terrorism. It funds terrorism and prolongs the conflict. Obviously, Yemenis are not doing that on purpose. They're being robbed, literally robbed on the highway. So this is astronomical. And like I said, you had $644 million in additional costs in 2021, paid by some of the poorest people on the planet. This is heartbreaking. And of course, I already got attacked by a bunch of Saudis. When I posted it, they're saying, this is not credible. Hold on, what do you mean it's not credible? These figures are not mine. They're from the World Bank, from the International Monetary Fund, and the United Nations. Are you saying they're not credible? You always cite them, right? What's wrong with the figures? Amir and I chose those sources on purpose so no one can accuse the data of being biased or cooked. This is all open source data, right? And are you saying, what else is not credible? The documents that I published, the UN clearance permits, these are real. I can assure you these are real. Go check with the UN if you like. These are real. You don't need to have any. You can literally just go on maritimetraffic.com, type in the name of the ship, and see where it is. They're not in Hudaida. They're in the coalition holding area, being detained for no reason, even after being cleared by the UN. So what's not credible? It's absolutely credible. On the contrary, it's bulletproof. They can't mess with this. So, the only thing that I'm asking you guys is please to share this. Please tell people about this, because people, already no one talks about Yemen, especially now with what's happening in Ukraine. But on top of it, even when people do talk about Yemen, they talk about the bombs, they talk about the famine, which is horrible. But this is a silent killer, and it's just as bad as the bombs, if not worse. Even my cousins in Syria, they're also under a de facto siege because of the sanctions. It's not a naval blockade, but it's the same thing. It's economic warfare. They told me the same thing, right? They said that they prefer the bombs over the sanctions. And Amir, who I did the report with, same thing he told me. He saw my video when I was talking about my cousins, and he said, it's like what your cousin said, what my cousin said, right? It's just as bad as the bombs, if not worse. And the majority of Yemenis have not been killed by bombs. They've been killed by the famine and the blockade. So we really have to spread the word about this. And this was a lot of work, really. What Amir did, absolutely brilliant. And he's a top economist. He knows this inside out. And he really did an amazing job putting this together. Amazing job. I cannot tell you how complicated this was. So it's important that we get these figures out. Again, Yemenis paid, this is the Yemenis that are living in the Sana'a area, so that's 80% of Yemenis. They paid $644 million extra for diesel and gasoline for no reason, just because of this blockade. And that's last year in 2021, right? And you have ships being detained 158 days on average for no reason. Again, just to make the Yemenis suffer. So, you go through Hudaida, you'll be detained, higher cost of fuel. You go, you go through Hudaida, so the main port, you'll be detained, higher costs of fuel because of the Demurrage fines. And if you go through Aden or Mukalla, one of the other ports that are controlled by the Saudi-backed government, you get hit with higher import taxes. You have longer routes to travel, so higher transportation costs, breakage costs. And then, of course, on top of that, Al-Qaeda and other militias shaking you down, robbing you on the highway. And who pays for this? Once again, Yemenis. This is not fair. I see people in the United States, rightfully complaining about paying $4 a gallon. But just to put it, I'm not trying to minimize that, but just to put it in perspective, the United States is a rich country. People are being forced to pay $4 a gallon there in one of the richest countries. Yemen is one of the poorest countries, and they're paying $9.50 a gallon. I mean, anywhere that would be wrong. And that would be bad and oppressive. But on top of everything that Yemen has been through, do you see why this is so angering and frustrating? And now on top of it, everyone's talking about Ukraine. No one wants to talk about Yemen. Let me tell you something. Again, it's like it just gets worse and worse and worse. So on top of the bombing, you have the famine. On top of that, you have the siege. The war in Ukraine is impacting Yemen. Do you know why? Because Yemen imports 40% of its wheat from Russia and Ukraine. So on top of everything I've told you, the costs are going up even more. It's really tragic. It's really. I feel like tragic doesn't encapsulate it, but really I'm really upset for what's happening to Yemenis. My heart really aches for them. This is not fair. This is unacceptable. And already people, even without the war in Ukraine, I feel like no one cared about Yemen. So I'm really trying to do my best here with Amir. I do this, not just as like a journalist or because Yemenis, are my brothers, but because it's a human thing. We have to care because we have to have compassion. So again, please share this far and wide. Please raise awareness. We have to tell people about this. I haven't seen this documented anywhere. I'm not saying I'm the only one who's ever talked about the siege, but I think this is a very comprehensive breakdown, step by step. It's original investigative journalism. It's unbiased, open source data using figures from the IMF, the World Bank, the UN. You can't deny this. It's undeniable what is happening in Yemen, especially when the Saudi coalition are saying, oh, there's a ceasefire. This is not a ceasefire. Just because you stop dropping the bombs doesn't mean you have stopped choking and starving Yemenis and depriving them of fuel, which in turn causes a ripple effect, a domino effect that is lethal. Lethal. Unless they lift the siege and stop the bombs, it's not a ceasefire. And another thing that I wanted to add, which I put in the article, just a few weeks ago, you had a donor conference for Yemen. Every year, all these countries, they get together at the UN and they have a donor conference and they try to raise money for Yemenis. And ironically, the ones that are pledging the most are the exact same countries that are bombing Yemen and imposing the siege on Yemen. This year, they couldn't even reach the goal. They only raised $1.7 billion out of 4.27. Now, again, aid is good, right? It helps, but it's not a solution. You even if the aid was high enough to pay for the higher fuel prices, it's still not, it wouldn't help because there's not enough fuel coming in because of the blockade, right? So the quantity is not even enough. And then the economy is in free fall. So many things are affected. No amount of aid is going to fix that. You have to lift the blockade. That is the message that has to be put through. It's not just stop the bombs. Absolutely stop the bombs, but lift the siege. And unless you lift the siege, the war is still ongoing. Economic warfare, siege warfare is war. It's just as lethal, if not more. And the ripple effect has the domino effect. It's absolutely lethal and deadly. Truly, literally deadly. I just read to you how hospitals cannot even store medicine. They cannot keep people in intensive care because of lack of fuel. You know, what more do I need to tell you? Not to mention people can't buy food. And everything else that comes with that. All the sectors that are disrupted. The agriculture, industry, service. Man, I can't even imagine. Like, I think it's just so, it's so massive. I don't think any one of us could comprehend the full scale of it, of how deadly and how damaging this siege warfare is. And so, again, thank you for the aid to Syria, to Yemen. It's not a solution. The solution is lift the blockade. And if the world really wants to help Yemen, they would do this. They would make sure that the Saudis lift the blockade. But of course, they're not going to do that because they are in bed with the Saudis and their coalition. They do it everywhere. You see similar effects in Syria, similar effects in Venezuela. Whether sanctions or blockade is still siege warfare. You see similar effects everywhere. And it's really heartbreaking.